Learn English through story. A whisper of love. In a small coastal town where the land met the sea, and the waves carried the secrets of the ocean to shore, there lived a fisherman named Elias. Elias was a quiet, middle-aged man with hands weathered from years of toil, casting his nets into the sea and bringing back the bounty it offered. His life was solitary, and though the town knew him well, Elias kept mostly to himself. His wife, Mara, had passed away years ago, and since then, the spark of joy had dimmed in his life. He had no children, and his only companion was the sound of the waves and the whisper of the wind. Every morning, before the sun rose, Elias would walk to the edge of the pier, casting his nets into the dark water. As he worked, the town would slowly awaken, and by midday, Elias would return home with his catch, selling it at the market to the townsfolk. His routine was simple, and yet, a certain melancholy seemed to weigh on his heart. He had known love once, in Mara's gentle laughter and warm embrace, but now the silence of her absence was all that remained. One autumn evening, after returning from the sea, Elias felt a strange restlessness in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't known for a long time, a subtle whisper of something he couldn't quite understand. Instead of returning home as he usually did, he found himself wandering to the old lighthouse on the outskirts of town. The lighthouse had been abandoned for years, its light no longer needed as the harbor had modernized, but it still stood tall, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the ocean. As Elias stood at the base of the lighthouse, staring up at the tower that seemed to pierce the heavens, he heard a faint sound like a whisper carried by the wind. He turned, expecting to see someone nearby, but there was no one, just the wind and the distant sound of the waves. Yet, the whisper lingered, soft but persistent, almost as if it were calling him by name. Elias hesitated, but something drew him toward the door of the lighthouse. It creaked open easily, as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the only light came from the cracks in the stone walls. He climbed the spiral staircase slowly, each step echoing in the hollow silence of the tower. When he reached the top, he found a small room with a single window overlooking the sea. In the center of the room, there was a chair, and on it sat a woman. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with long dark hair that fell in waves over her shoulders. Her eyes were closed, and she appeared to be sleeping, her hands resting gently in her lap. Elias froze, unsure of what to do. He hadn't expected to find anyone here, let alone a woman who seemed so out of place in this forgotten tower. But then, the woman stirred, her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at Elias with a soft smile. "You've come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the same voice he had heard outside. Elias felt a strange mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman rose from the chair, her movements graceful and slow. "My name is Serafina," she said. "I've been waiting for you, Elias." He blinked, stunned. "How do you know my name?" Serafina walked to the window, gazing out at the sea. "The sea knows your name. It knows the hearts of those who live by it, and it brought me to you." Elias took a step back, unsure of what to make of her words. "What do you mean? Why are you here?" She turned to him, her eyes deep and sorrowful. "I am here because your heart has been whispering to the wind, to the sea, to the sky. It has been calling out for something more. You've forgotten what it means to truly live, Elias. You've been alive, yes, but you have not truly lived since Mara left you." The mention of Mara's name hit Elias like a wave crashing against the shore. He hadn't spoken of her to anyone in years, hadn't allowed himself to even think of her for too long. It was too painful, too raw. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why now?" "Because love is never truly gone," Serafina said softly. "It doesn't disappear with death or distance. It lingers, like a whisper, waiting for someone to listen. Mara's love for you still lives, Elias, but you've closed your heart to it. You've shut yourself away, believing that with her gone, there is no more love left for you in this world. But love is everywhere, in the wind, in the sea, in the smallest moments of life. It is waiting for you to notice." Elias shook his head, his chest tight with emotion. "I don't know how to listen," he admitted. "I don't know how to let it in." Serafina smiled gently and took a step toward him. "You start by letting go," she said, "by forgiving yourself for the things you cannot change, and by opening your heart to the possibility that love can still find you, even in the quietest of whispers." For a long time, Elias stood in silence, the weight of her words sinking into him. He thought of Mara, of the love they had shared, and of the years he had spent trying to bury that love in the depths of his heart, thinking it would only bring him pain. But now, standing here in this forgotten lighthouse with a woman who seemed to know him better than he knew himself, Elias realized that love was not something to be buried or forgotten. It was something to be cherished, even in its absence. Finally, Elias spoke. "How do I let go?" Serafina's eyes were kind as she reached out and placed a hand on his chest, over his heart. "By listening," she whispered, "to the wind, to the sea, and to your own heart. It will tell you when it's time to let go. And when you do, love will find you again." Elias closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand and the soft breeze coming through the window. He listened to the sound of the waves, to the rustle of the wind, and to the quiet beating of his heart. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, something that had been locked away for too long. When he opened his eyes, Serafina was gone. The room was empty, and the only sound was the gentle whisper of the wind through the cracks in the walls. Elias stood there for a long time, staring out at the sea, feeling the weight of his grief slowly lift, like a fog dissipating in the morning sun. The days that followed were different for Elias. He still went to the pier each morning, casting his nets into the sea, but something had changed. He no longer felt the same heavy loneliness that had haunted him for so long. Instead, there was a quiet peace, a sense of connection to the world around him that he hadn't known in years. He began to notice the little things, the way the sunlight danced on the water, the sound of the seagulls calling overhead, the laughter of the children playing on the shore. And in those small moments, he felt Mara's love again, not as a painful reminder of what he had lost, but as a gentle whisper of what he still carried with him. One evening, as Elias stood at the edge of the pier, watching the sun set over the horizon, he heard the whisper again. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was a whisper of love, carried on the wind, reminding him that love was never truly gone. It was always with him, in the quiet moments, in the beauty of the world, and in the beating of his own heart. And in that moment, Elias smiled, knowing that he had finally learned to listen. Love is eternal. Even when those we cherish are no longer with us, it exists not just in grand gestures, but in the small, quiet moments that fill our lives. Sometimes, we close our hearts to love because of pain, but when we allow ourselves to listen and be open, love will always find us again, like a whisper on the wind. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoy, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.